Hey, what's going on, everyone? Okay, give me 1 second. Just going to set things up here, and then we'll rock and roll. Let me just do this thing here so I can take some notes. Okay, let's see. Okay, cool. Okay, so let me share this as well. Boom, boom. All right. So again, you guys, if you have any questions, I wonder if I got my earphones set up. Can you guys let me know? Are you able to clearly hear me? From time to time, I kind of plug these in, but it doesn't quite pick up the sound very well. Let me know. So we'll begin in a second. Today we're gonna kind of mix it up. We did a lot of lifestyle stuff for a few weeks, and today we're gonna go back to training, and in particular, how to build an aesthetically appealing body, drug-free, without the use of drugs. Okay, which is very rare. I think a lot of people, mostly just promoting drug healthcare these days, all the druggy fitness influencers, and then the pill pusher medical doctors. Hey, what up, David? Let me know how things are going. Today we're going to be covering how to build an aesthetically appealing physique without the use of drugs. I know, crazy concept, right? Since everyone's kind of all into the drug culture these days. But we'll wait for a few people to jump in, and then we'll rock and roll. And David, let me know how things are with you. And if you have any questions at all, I'll try my best to address it. So, okay. All right. Take over the notes here. Okay. So we'll rock and roll. And just remember, if you guys can't get to these on time at 1 p.m. Pacific, I usually do them on Saturdays. I always post them in the groups after, or just leave them on my page regardless. And then I also have my podcast, and I upload these lives straight to the podcast after. You can find that usually just have it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, on Eugene Trufkin Radio, okay? I'm almost up to, proud to say, like almost up to 200 episodes. I think I'm like 190 at this point or so. And I'll try to hit the 200 mark pretty soon, in hopes of promoting like drug-free healthcare. It's very rare in America, for anyone to kind of promote this message. Most of the time it's just kind of symptom management, drug healthcare. And it's the same in the fitness community, when looking to build an aesthetically appealing physique, which is a goal for a lot of people. It's been a primary goal for mine. And it's nothing to worry about. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just going to the gym and my primary motivation is just to look better. If that's what gets you into the gym very consistently, and it's something that you find that you're passionate about, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because as you improve your body aesthetically, inevitably your metabolic health markers will improve as well, and various aspects of your psychology will improve as well. I've never seen anyone, for the most part, and there are no absolutes, of course, you can get into the extreme versions of body dysmorphia and stuff of this sort, but really for the most part, for pretty much 95% of people in that bell-shaped distribution curve of the population, when you get their appearance to improve, their self-esteem improves, they start socializing way more, which has a positive impact on their psychology as well. Their depression goes down, typically their anxiety goes down, negative self-image or internal critic also kind of goes down as well, and stuff of this sort. So through 20 years of coaching, although I do mainly holistic healthcare, I kind of work on physique development as well. Just getting the person not only to be healthier with their metabolic markers, but also to look way better in the process, simply because I found it has such a huge positive impact on their life, just focusing on just getting them to look better while improving their health as well. So you guys, don't even worry about it if like improving your looks is a important factor for you. Then just go for it. It's just whatever gets you into the gym consistently, and stuff of that sort. Because I can tell you for sure, training for aesthetics or just building a very beautiful physique has been one of those things where I never really had to motivate myself to do it. And if you find that in any aspect of life, whether it be like something for, business or art or whatever, you find this one kind of passion project of yours where it's like so natural that you don't have to motivate yourself to do it or find any of these, crazy motivation things or, talking yourself into doing it and stuff of that sort. That is gold. So if you have found that in your life, in any aspect of your life, just go for it. Because most people never find that, and then unfortunately it becomes kind of like a grind having to do things. So whether, you like painting or, I like coloring and stuff of this sort and art as well, just find those things, you know what I mean, that you don't have to motivate yourself too much to do. That's huge. And everyone is born with like one or two of these things, so everyone has it. And it's all about being intuitive and just really listening to that inner voice and kind of sitting with the idea of like, what can I do to not have to motivate myself so much to do? What can I do just because I like it? You know what I mean? So again, that for me has been developing my body aesthetically. So for David, it's been fishing. And again, everyone has this thing, you know what I mean? And it's just all about like finding it. And some people, like luckily I just got really lucky and I just found it really early in life. I kind of stepped in the gym and as I saw my body changing, I just like couldn't stop, you know what I mean? I kind of took an artistic eye to it too. Like how could I shape my physique to be aesthetically appealing, but then also keep my skin nice and keep my hair nice, etc., etc. And that's it, you know what I mean? And then I learned a lot, read, this was way back. I started this journey, like 22 years ago or something. And it was way back in, I forgot the website, bodybuilding.com. Hopefully it's still around. I remember I was reading like all the articles, you know what I mean, on there on like how to, develop a perfect muscle to fat ratio, how to, improve your metabolic rate so that you're burning so many calories, you know what I mean? Different ways of developing the chest or the back, you know what I mean, or the quadriceps, and kind of developing the outer sweep of the quadriceps or inner sweep or whatever, you know what I mean, and stuff of this sort. It was just like fascinating to me. And then I would go read these things and then kind of like apply them in the gym and kind of see what really worked for me. Because that's another thing about like any kind of fitness or health advice, guys. It's all relative and there are no absolutes, So what works for one person may do absolutely nothing for another or maybe hurt a third person. You know what I mean? So you can't be too stuck on kind of scientific studies which have a variance in their sample pool in every single study anyways. Even in a meta-analysis, there's variance from study to study. And then if you put a microscope into any one of those studies, there's a gargantuous variance there too. So you can't draw like broad general conclusions. Inevitably, you just got to go tinker and see what works for you. And what works may also change, from one decade to another. So what worked in your 20s may not work in your 30s anymore. What worked in your 30s may not work in your 40s anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So let's kind of jump in, just like I do with a lot of my lives. I'm simply going to go down a list. How important are any of these is going to vary depending on your journey. And today we're going to be talking about how to build a beautiful physique, drug-free, without having to use all the anabolic steroids and the peptides and this and that, okay? And the first step, guys, when I know social media is so popular now, but be super careful, okay? Please don't just listen to someone blindly. This includes me, because inevitably, even if they're extremely competent, they never met you personally. And to give proper mental or physical health advice, you need to know that particular person's circumstance in life. Where are they currently? What are their core values? In this case, what's their lifting age? Because we're going to be focused on how to build an aesthetically appealing body from a workout perspective, because there are various layers to how to build an aesthetically appealing body as well. There's, the topic of the biological level, like how to actually train the passive and active tissue of the body, and deal with the central nervous system and its capacity to train, digestive system, endocrine system, etc., etc., okay? But then there's also the thinking emotional dimension, there's the spiritual aspect and various other levels to consider. So today we're going to be mainly focused from the training perspective. How do we properly train to develop an aesthetically appealing body? And the first step is, like I kind of mentioned, I go on tangents a little bit and I'll try to be more precise, is be super careful with who you listen to online, especially in the fitness space, especially in the building an aesthetically appealing, like kind of bodybuilding physique space, because pretty much probably like 98% of the influencers you follow online are on a lot of drugs, and they're not using just minute amounts, maybe like as they claim, or even if they're claiming, but they're using like gargantuous amounts. And you can see by the amount of influencers that, die basically before 35. They're not dying because they're healthy people. You know what I mean? And you got to ask yourself some critical questions, is like, if their systems or their knowledge worked so well, why do they have to use so many drugs? You know what I mean? And you'll notice that a lot of these influencers also disappear at like 35. And they leave the industry because of various health problems that arise from using a lot of these drugs and these peptides and stuff of that sort. And I know they may sound smart, but trust me, they know probably just slightly more than you know. And it's not your fault that you don't know a lot of these things, because it's not like the industry you're in, you know what I mean? So don't expect to just know everything. It's not fair to put that much pressure on yourself. But just know they're like, when you get to know a lot of these kind of druggy influencers, they're not like very competent. And really the only thing holding them together is just their drug abuse. They're not just using it, they're actually like abusing these drugs. And you have to understand that a lot of these drugs are put together on the black market in someone's garage. It's not like a certified, like a pharmacy, you know what I mean? That's FDA inspected, that from the medications you're getting at CVS, for example, it's kind of far from that truth. So you got to be critical, before you take an advice. It's like, hey, this person is using a lot of drugs. They don't know how to do it sustainably or in a healthy way. Then the obvious answer is, how are they going to teach you how to do it sustainably and in a healthy way as well? And most likely they're not, you know what I mean? And a lot of times too, it's like they also have various coaches that may actually be competent. So it's not like they're the ones that are competent themselves, So be very, very careful with who you listen to. Not only influencers, but also coaches. So if you hire a coach and they're all on anabolics, you know what I mean? You got to ask yourself, like, hey, if this guy really knew what they're doing, especially if they're still on the younger side, like 30 or 40, and they can't even maintain a good looking physique at that age without all these drugs, kind of like the real answer is like, they really don't know that much then. And from my experience, it's, they really don't know that much. They're actually like generally kind of like lower IQ. They're more kind of like confident, you know what I mean? But don't get that confidence confused with actual competence, because the competence is definitely for sure not there in like 99% of cases. So be very careful, and try to follow, drug-free influencers that actually have like a good aesthetically appealing physique in their 30s or 40s or 50s or stuff of this sort, you know what I mean? So like Paul Chek would be like a good example. So he's, I don't know, like 65 at this point and still looking amazing, still able to work out with great intensity, still very strong, pain-free, mentally well, has a lot of energy, you know what I mean? And try to kind of see like, hey, this guy's like 65. I wonder what he's doing, you know what I mean? And then kind of try to do that instead of following this like 30 or 40-year-old druggy influencer. And then you're going to take their advice. And of course, you're going to be sick as well, So, okay. So the second step is, everyone is going to be different here, but you want to kind of determine your starting place and what you're actually trying to accomplish. So a good idea is maybe for some people is to find, like a physique that they like, you know what I mean? That matches their body dimensions as well. And another place to start to consider is kind of like, where is my current body fat percentage at? You know what I mean? So like if you're a male and you're like 10 or 12% body fat, that's a great place to start already a muscle development program. But if you're a male and let's say you're like 15, 20% body fat, so a good way to tell is you guys can get a DEXA scan done. That's the gold standard. Or you could just kind of look at your midsection, and this is just rough, but like, let's say you have like an inch fat density on right below your belly button, you're most likely like at 20% body fat, which is kind of overweight for males. Let's say you have an inch and a half or more right below your belly button of fat density, then most likely you're like at 25% or above, which is obese for males. So in that case, if you're in that starting place, you want to first lose your body fat to a reasonable number. That number is, I found with clients to be around 10 or 12%, but for some people it could even be 10 or 15%, that kind of variance. So you can safely say, 10 or 15%. And if you get down to that number, then you can conclude your fat loss phase. So you need to do a fat loss phase first, and then just really double down on a muscle development phase. And a common question is a lot of people ask, well, like, why can't I put on muscle and lose fat at the same time? So you can, but the issue is the muscle gain process is extremely slow compared to how fast you could lose body fat. And the good thing is one common myth is like body fat is tougher to lose with age. It's definitely not tougher. And you'll see that metabolism really doesn't change at all from like your mid-20s all the way through your mid-60s. So it's very easy to lose body fat at any age. In fact, one of my clients is here, 60 years old, David Larson, and he lost 100 pounds, in like, I think, a 12-month period at 60. And on top of that, we didn't even work out for the first, I think, 3 or 4 months. I forget exactly because it's already been 2 years already, because of a foot injury he had on a fishing trip shortly before the program began. And he still lost, 30 or 40 pounds within that 3 to 4 months and stuff of this sort. So what you want to consider is when you're trying to shape your physique is you can realistically just do one or the other. So there are some small exceptions. Like if a person is morbidly obese, like they're super huge and they've never had any weightlifting experience whatsoever, and you actually get them on a really well-structured hypertrophy program and a lot of other good coaching around like nutrition and central nervous system management and sleep management, et cetera, they could actually put on a significant amount of muscle because of their newbie gain window. So when you start lifting weights, your first like year or two, you can make massive progress. You can night and day difference in terms of how you look. You can probably maybe put on like 10, 15, maybe 20 pounds of muscle if you're a really good hyper responder your first year, and 20 pounds or even 10 pounds is a gargantuous amount. You can probably do that for like 2 years. But then after the newbie gain window is over, you're realistically kind of putting on just a handful of pounds of muscle per year, presuming you're doing everything correctly, very consistent, have enough biological adaptation and recovery from workouts, managing, not having toxic relationships in your life or working like 80-hour weeks at a very stressful like financial job, for example, and stuff of this sort. Then you can, put on another 2 pounds a year consistently, which doesn't seem like a lot. But again, it's like, let's say you do 2 pounds a year consistently for 10 years, that's 20 pounds. On top of the 20 pounds you already gained in like your 2-year newbie window. You know what I mean? So you're like 40 pounds of muscle heavier at the end of a 12-year period, which is freaking huge. I mean, you're like a completely different person visually at that point. And your strength will be through the roof different. Your joints will be a lot stronger if you did everything correctly, et cetera, et cetera. So another situation of where a person can actually gain a decent amount of muscle while losing body fat at the same time is if you already had a very muscular individual that happened to get like seriously injured. So they kind of blew out their back, something that takes quite a long time to recover from, which back injuries, spine injuries usually take quite a long time to recover from. And they didn't do anything for a year because of physical therapy or stuff of this sort. And they needed the disc to kind of settle down and heal and gristle over. So if you get this person back into a training program, they could actually lose a lot of fat and gain a lot of muscle at the same time. But really, they're gaining back muscle they've already had, which is a completely different story compared to creating just new muscle that you've never even had altogether, okay? So obviously, if you're regaining muscle you've already had but lost due to inactivity because of an injury, you could gain quite a bit of muscle. But and then also, the other aspect is people, especially the influencer space, they use a gargantuous amount of anabolics, so many. And then for sure, they can kind of noticeably lose a lot of body fat and gain a lot of muscle at the same time. But just know this isn't because they know anything special that you don't know. This is just because they're using a lot of harmful drugs and not kind of thinking too far ahead in terms of their well-being or being a good influence for you guys. They're thinking more of like short-term, very ego-driven psychology of just wanting to become popular or make a bunch of money off selling programs, convincing people that this can be done naturally. And then a lot of people just foolishly believe it. Although there's a lot more transparency these days in terms of a lot of accounts calling out these fake bogus accounts and stuff of that sort. But don't be one of these people, you know what I mean, that falls for them. So a good way to tell if a person's results are basically because of drug use and not because of anything they know is sometimes they'll just tell you, you know what I mean? That's a good example. If they're like an IFBB pro, that's for sure they're using anabolics, okay? If they look dramatically different year by year, that means they're kind of like using anabolics and then cycling off of it so they lose all their gains and then they cycle back on it. This is even more obvious with females because you'll never get these big fluctuations with females either, and stuff of this sort. A lot of times in terms of seeing if a person even knows what they're talking about from a coaching perspective is like, do they have actually like a laundry list of successful clients? Because if they don't, then that's another thing to question. It's like, well, if this person is so good, how come they only have pictures of themselves and maybe a sprinkle of clients, although in their description they say they've helped thousands of people? Well, if you helped thousands of people, how come I don't see thousands of transformations? You know what I mean? It's just like obvious questions you need to ask. So you guys, the second step, getting back to the point here, is way to determine, where to begin is be crystal clear on the type of physique you're trying to develop and your body structure. Because your body structure is going to determine like how you would have to structure a specific workout program. So if you're more of a box frame, or more of a square frame, then you need to consider how to, overemphasize, maybe really overdeveloping your lats or your shoulders. Because if your midsection is kind of very boxy naturally, that's going to take away from the appeal of having like a very wide shoulder frame. You know what I mean? Because the wider your midsection is, the more narrow your shoulder frame looks. So then you would have to kind of strategize on how could I really just optically or visually make my upper body look much wider to give the optical illusion of my midsection being much more narrow and stuff of this sort. Then maybe some other good ideas are to not do like a standing overhead press or like very heavy exercises like back squats or deadlifts that really put a lot of strain on the transverse abdominis and the external obliques, and thus make your midsection look even more boxy. You know what I mean? So this needs to be taken into consideration. But another thing I mentioned, just a good objective way, is just to determine like, where's my body fat currently, and do I need to focus on a fat loss program or a muscle gain program? And again, if you're like 20%, if you're, let's say, over 15% body fat for a male, then, doing a fat loss program initially would be ideal. You'll put on a few pounds of muscle, but your main emphasis will be on losing a lot of body fat. And then once you get down to that, let's say 10 or 12% body fat range, then you can transition into a muscle development phase. And most likely, if you do it right, you'll pretty much just stay on that phase for your whole entire life. Because especially, let's say 40 plus for sure, you need to always be bulking because you're countering the muscle loss due to age, right? So let's say in your 40s, if you did nothing, you would lose 2 pounds of muscle. So then your goal in your 40s might be to put on like 8 or 10 pounds of muscle during that 10-year period. So now it's like you're at 8 pounds of muscle versus like -2, you know what I mean? And in your 50s, it's going to be accelerated a bit more. So once again, the bulking becomes even more important. So there really should be no kind of maintenance phase when you're 40 plus, because you're fighting age, right? And I mentioned body fat is easy to lose at any age, but it's not the case with muscle gain. Muscle gain definitely becomes tougher with age, but not impossible. You just have to kind of be more persistent. And because it becomes tougher at age, that's why you need to be just bulking and gaining muscle basically when you're 40 plus indefinitely. And the goal, guys, is to really try to put on like as much muscle as possible, ideally. Now, again, this is from the reference of wanting an aesthetically appealing physique, which requires a good ratio of muscle density to leanness. So you need that size, that bulk, you know what I mean? Or you're just going to look like super skinny. So 40 plus, forgot my train of thought there, but 40 plus, you just need to be bulking and emphasizing gaining muscle and trying to put on ideally as much muscle as possible before you hit 60, you know? And that way, as you start chipping away at 60, you can probably, honestly, if you're really on point with everything, maintain your muscle mass very well throughout your 60s. And then at 70s, there's going to be a dip inevitably. But the thing is, you're starting at such a high amount of muscle. You know what I mean? So you're going to end up being kind of like a very ripped and lean older guy in your 70s, which is a symbol of success. That's where you want to be. You know what I mean? Not like a shriveled melted ice cream cone. You know what I mean? And the only thing that's also, keep in mind, the only thing that's really going to keep your body looking young and vital into old age is the amount of muscle mass you do have. That's what gets people to look very old very quickly when they're 40 plus, is they don't have that much muscle mass to begin with. And then due to aging, they start losing it quite quickly. It starts compounding at 40. And they basically lose the very little they have remaining. And they start looking very old, like their skin gets very saggy and stuff of this sort, you know? But you want to be thinking about this way early, because again, the muscle development program, it's a very long process. You know what I mean? You're not going to look like the druggy influencers that you see online, you know what I mean, overnight, you know, and stuff of this sort. So what type of physique? Understanding the importance of muscle density. That's another thing, guys. Like, a lot of people try to like look bigger, but they don't have the muscle density to support it. So you got to remember, you have to have like a decent amount of muscle density, which inevitably requires your weight to go up. You can't increase your muscle without your weight increasing. You know what I mean? That's another big mistake I see a lot of people making. And they cut down when they don't really have that much muscle mass to begin with. So they look very kind of skinny and weak at the end. You know what I mean? So you need to emphasize, like, hey, if I want that lean, crisp look, you know, that good full chest, shoulders, etc., I need mass. That's not going to come from nothing. And it's not going to happen in a caloric maintenance. You know what I mean? Unless you're extremely genetically gifted, like one out of a few thousand, or just on a lot of anabolics, which is how a lot of these influencers are making their progress. Again, they don't know that much more than you do. They're just using a lot of drugs. So don't think like, hey, you got to listen to these people or anything of that sort. So just the importance of, like, keep in mind, like, you need muscle density. That's why your fat loss program should be quick, you know, if you are overweight at the moment. And then you need to transition into basically a lifelong, kind of like a holistic lifestyle program with an emphasis on muscle development, and stay on that basically for the rest of your life. Again, if the goal is to have an aesthetically appealing, beautiful body, because you need a good balance of muscle density and leanness. And you can't just be lean, because you're going to look skinny without that muscle density accompanied. So, okay. The next step, guys, is, let me get a sip of coffee here. Again, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. Happy to try to answer them. But the next step is, once you kind of determine what you're trying to achieve, you want to get on the right program. So for muscle development, when you want like an aesthetically appealing body that has a great muscle to fat ratio, has that good, dense, thick chest musculature, thick back musculature, good, nice quads, you definitely don't want to be doing like CrossFit, boot camp, like high intensity training. It's a very inferior style of training for building an aesthetically appealing physique. Because it just puts, first of all, the program design is terrible. Second of all, it puts a gargantuous amount of stress on the central nervous system, but understimulates your muscle tissue. You want ideally kind of the reverse. You want to overstimulate muscle tissue while ideally not taxing the central nervous system so much so you can have the appropriate volume to actually grow the muscle. You know what I mean? So for sure, like personally, I would stay away from CrossFit. I would stay away from, I don't even know what the hell is going on in that world, but it's very appealing for the general audience to try to go to these kind of training systems because they kind of associate this high intensity training with productivity. It's actually counterproductive. All you're going to do is just look like a shriveled prune. All you're going to do is just waste a lot of money, because I don't think these group training things are worth it at all. You're going to deplete your testosterone. You're going to crash it into the ground, and you're going to lose a bunch of muscle too. The guys with the great physiques that you see aren't training that way. They're doing, like, for example, we'll cover it in a second. They're training a way different way. They're training for aesthetics. You know what I mean? So if your goal is aesthetics, you need to be training for aesthetics. I really can't emphasize that. Like if your goal is running, I don't want you to see you swimming just because they both use a cardiovascular system extensively. You know what I mean? If your goal is running, you need to be running and maybe having a supplementary routine to enhance that running. You know what I mean? So if your goal is aesthetics, you need to be training for aesthetics. And to train for aesthetics, you need to stay away from like CrossFit, high intensity boot camp courses and stuff of this sort for a couple of reasons. So first, the type of coaches that run these programs typically are more kind of like money-driven coaches. Because if they're very, very competent and were conscious of the nuance of mental and physical health, they would stick to more like one-on-one coaching models. Just because everyone is so different. And if you really gain mastery of the human body and mind, you understand that right away. And you need to know that individual's circumstance to give them appropriate advice. And how are you going to do that when you're training a class of like 20 people? So it's more kind of like, I've been in this industry for 20 years, professionally, like 40 years in total. And I can tell you, it's like the majority of people that start these group training classes, money is on their mind first and foremost. And how well you progress and do is such a distant second. They oftentimes don't care. And I know they have great personalities and stuff of this sort, but don't conflate that, don't correlate that with actually being competent and on a good program, because oftentimes not the case. And you can kind of just go look around the class. You know what I mean? You see a lot of people with injuries. They don't look great. They look exhausted, and stuff of this sort. So keep that in mind. You know what I mean? It's cheaper. I don't know how much they charge, maybe $200, $300 membership a month to do these group classes, but they're poorly designed. And the guys with the great physiques are never training like that. I don't train that way. And I don't think you should either if you're into aesthetically developing your body, especially drug-free. So the routines that do work super well, and again, you got to tinker and find out what's going to work best for you. But I found, so let me talk about the bro split, because this is often like a popular system. That one I found to work not as well, okay? The systems the bro split is like chest one day, back another day, chest or legs the third day. And the reason for that is because you don't get the appropriate amount of volume per muscle group. What I found actually worked way better is like an upper-lower split. So you do like chest and back on Monday, then legs on Tuesday, you're off on Wednesday, then, I don't know, chest and back or shoulders and back on Thursday, then legs on Friday. And then you can do probably like a weak muscle group on Saturday. You know what I mean? Or stuff of this sort. That way you can get the appropriate amount of volume and exposure to have that muscle keep growing. Because if you do like a bro split, what ends up happening is you kind of understimulate the muscle in general, and especially like the central nervous system, and then you don't hit it again for a very long time. And this could work really well for, again, very, very genetically gifted people, but I found it to be not work as well as compared to an upper body split. You could also do like a push, pull, lower body layout as well. That one I don't like as much either as an upper and lower body layout, but it does work for a lot of people, and I still feel it's better than the bro split. So if you had to pick between the two. So again, the worst possible thing you could do for developing an aesthetically appealing body is do like CrossFit, boot camp classes, stuff of this sort. The best I found with clients and myself is like an upper lower body split. Push pull lower works fairly well too. Sometimes you can mix and match if you just get bored of the other, and bro split kind of I found worked not as well. So in terms of how to structure these, that's going to vary from person to person depending on, how much of a workload they have outside of the gym, how much responsibilities, their injury history, their movement competency, et cetera, et cetera. That's where good coaching comes in helpful, and you're not going to get any absolute answers there. So don't even try it. If you do try it on your own, you just have to kind of tinker and see what works best for you. You know what I mean? Another thing to consider is you kind of want to structure, let's say you go with an upper lower body split. You want to structure it with, like what I found worked best was an undulating periodization program. So it's quite simple. You start with an accumulation phase for like 4 weeks. Usually the 4th week, I always do a deload week with clients because this helps with recovery and to give the joints a little bit of a break before you move on to an intensification phase, which is done for another 4 weeks, with the 4th week being a deload week. And then you go to a more intense accumulation phase. You know what I mean? And then you kind of do these cyclical undulating patterns, customized to the person's needs. Again, if you're following anyone online in the health space, whether it be mental or physical health, and they start throwing out absolutes, like just do this and it's going to work for everyone, like you have to instantly stop listening to this person, because there are no absolutes. Even a person that's pretty amateur in the field understands this. And if they're throwing out absolutes, it tells me 2 things. So 1, they may not actually be competent. 2, they may be competent, but they're deceiving you by making something that has a lot of nuance and detail seem more simple than it is. And oftentimes this is what popular influencers fall into. And it's kind of like an algorithm thing, because if they really explain it to the degree that it needs to be explained, they would lose a large percentage of their audience, because you can't explain it in a quick 30-second soundbite on TikTok. You know what I mean? It all depends. It all depends. So like, for example, if one guy, let's say you have 2 twins and they're both 40 years old and they're both 20 pounds overweight, like exactly 20 pounds overweight. Remember, these are twins, like identical Siamese twins. The reason twin 1 got overweight could be completely vastly different than the reason twin 2 got overweight. Thus, their approaches will be completely different. If you're looking to meet the problem at its correct level, which is what you need to do to come to a complete resolution. So on the surface, it looks like they could be on the same program, but in reality, they can't. You know what I mean? Because one may get the results and one may not, because one, you didn't meet the problem at its correct level, and the other you did. So you got to pay attention to this. And unfortunately, I wish it was like, I wish, for example, like depression was like as easy as like, here, just take this antidepressant. But you notice people on antidepression meds are still depressed. You know what I mean? So you can't ever medically drug yourself into a life of health and happiness. So, okay. Another thing that I would recommend doing when you're looking to build an aesthetically appealing physique is stop changing things all the time. You're doing CrossFit one day, then a bodybuilding routine the next year, and then calisthenics the 3rd year. So this is what keeps people stuck in a cycle of plateaus all the time and actually regressing with age. Because remember, like I mentioned, at 40 plus, you need to be on like a permanent bulk, basically, permanent muscle gain program to offset the difference of aging. So, and to do that, you need to expose your central nervous system to repetitive activities. So not only does your central nervous system accumulate to what needs to be lifted or mastered, but also your active and passive tissue get used to those exact movements as well. So if you're, doing isolation training, just trying to isolate the chest, for 2 years, and then all of a sudden now you're doing some CrossFit stuff or whatever, your central nervous system gets confused and it doesn't know where to allocate its limited energy. You know what I mean? And on top of that, your injury risk increases greatly too, because now it's kind of like you shifted careers. You know what I mean? And obviously, like you guys, if you're shifting careers all the time, it may be like fun, initially, but you never get much out of it. You know what I mean? You never reach mastery. And because having a very muscular physique, it's not natural, even when done naturally. You need to be very consistent and persistent with the systems we talk about here to develop that muscular body. And if you're kind of wishy-washy, inconsistent with your training, inconsistent with your nutrition, inconsistent with your lifestyle, or just changing your training up way too much, you're going to hit plateaus. And not only a plateau, you're going to slide in the negative direction if you're 40 plus. Because again, you need to be in perpetual muscle gain program once you're 40 plus to offset the difference of aging. So avoid changing it up. And in fact, I would even avoid, this is going to be our next topic, I would avoid changing your exercises even too often. So kind of stick with 4 main movements. And of course, like say, the leg press is one of your main movements. For example, you can stick with it indefinitely, but just change your foot placement. So, on one phase it's narrow, on another phase it's wide, on another phase it's kind of narrow low or narrow high or whatever. But inevitably you're doing the same exercise, just your foot placement is changing. Same exact thing is like, the dumbbell press is one of the best exercises to develop a bigger, more aesthetically appealing chest, even a lot better than the bench press in my opinion, and probably most people's opinions. Because the chest kind of works when it's developed more of like, the ideal movement is more of like a fly type movement, which is very tough to simulate with a bench press, but you could easily do that with a dumbbell. So if that's one of your movements, you got, even if you stuck with the flat dumbbell press, you can do a neutral grip or semi-pronated or pronated grip, you know what I mean? Or even supinated grip, but you're sticking with the same exercise. So you can progress in your tissue, your active and passive tissue can get used to those loads. They have that biological adaptation. But if you're constantly changing it, you confuse your central nervous system. And then on top of that, every time you change it, those ligaments and tendons may not be used to that new type of exercise or the range of motions that exercise imposes. And thus you might surpass the biological tipping point and get an injury, And this is way more likely to happen when people jump around through training styles. Freddie, what is going on when they jump around through training styles? So like today they're doing bodybuilding for 2 years and now they're doing like CrossFit or calisthenics or whatever. Again, it's fun, I get it, but you're not going to progress anywhere. In fact, you're going to regress, not only just plateau, you're actually going to regress. So pick the right tools, is what I'm getting at. I'm trying to read my notes here. Stop changing exercise is important. And you guys, in terms of training style, it's not just about the exercise, but it's also like how you do it, right? So there are a couple, from a training perspective, 2 very important variables to focus on when you're trying to like build a bigger chest, with good density, is you have to have continuous mechanical tension during your lifts. So as you're pressing, you want to feel that continuous tension in the chest the entire time, throughout the full entire range of motion, whatever that range of motion may be. And don't get too fixated on having full range of motion all the time. So full range of motion is whatever range of motion you could attain that keeps that continuous mechanical tension in the chest. So once you lose that tension, you're either lost that mind-muscle connection, or possibly you're just surpassing the range of motion for that particular muscle group for you. And if you lose that tension, not only do you increase your chances of injury, but also you'll decrease your results over time. You know what I mean? So keep that in mind. Mechanical tension is so important. And then another thing to consider is getting pretty close to concentric failure on the targeted muscle group. That's another very, very important part of the journey to master, not just doing the exercise. So you can have one guy doing a flat dumbbell press with no mechanical tension and no concentric failure, and then another guy doing the flat dumbbell press, the same exact exercise, but having that deep mind muscle connection, that mechanical tension all the way through, and getting to that concentric failure. And he looks amazing. You know what I mean? And you're like, well, they're doing the same exercise, you know? Yes, but how this guy is doing it is way different. Although on the outside, it looks pretty much all the same. Huge difference in training style, okay? So what I like to do is I like to voluntarily create the tension in the targeted muscle group and then use the external tension to facilitate that voluntary contraction already and keep that continuous tension, that mechanical tension, the entire time during the training session. So that is, guys, that is so important for injury prevention, but also a critical step that must be mastered for aesthetically developing your physique. And you never get these things in doing like CrossFit or boot camps, which is one of the reasons why I suggested to stay away from it, on top of just their abysmally poor program design. You never see any CrossFit or boot campers, again, like really having an appealing physique, but also you never see them setting any records. They don't set any strength records. They don't set any physique records. You know what I mean? They're kind of these jack of all trades, but really not good at anything kind of thing. So, and again, 40 plus, I guarantee you're just burning off muscle doing that kind of training and just exhausting your central nervous system and depreciating your testosterone like crazy. I would stay away. Okay. So again, the importance of keeping, roughly all the same exercises. That's so important. Stop changing things around. Every time you're always changing things around, it's kind of like changing your career oftentimes. You're never going to get good at anything and you're not going to see good results. And not only, again, 40 plus, not only are you going to hit a plateau, you're actually going to depreciate because you're losing muscle mass. You're fighting age. So another thing from a training perspective, and this is a little bit from a psychology perspective, but it's so closely connected here, is, master topics like sports psychology. You know what I mean? There are many books on Amazon on these topics, and they're all fascinating. How you can, through neuroplasticity, get your mind to change your mind. Because oftentimes, the biggest limiting factor, two of them, in a person's journey is their mind and lack of education on what to do. I feel the education part is easier, you know what I mean, for a lot of people. But this is a great subject to educate yourself on. And it's not like super overly complicated, you know what I mean? And there's so many good books online. And it's all fascinating to read. Just check out sports psychology. But some things that have worked for me is just simply journaling. So here, guys, this is a form of sports psychology you can use. It just gives you a bit more introspection. And like at the end, I take this to my training sessions and I have it in my backpack. And at the end of training sessions, I just simply write down, like, first, how focused was I during that training session? How many times did my mind deviate from what I'm trying to do at hand to maybe something I need to do with my work or some kind of thing going outside of work or whatever, you know what I mean? Because if you're on point, you're hyper focused on your next set. So for example, during your set, you're focused on, am I keeping that continuous tension in the chest, for example, since we cover the chest so much? Am I getting that concentric failure? Am I having no micro movements? You're focused on all that. Like how's the fiber feeling as I go all the way down? And then how are the muscle fibers contracting as I go all the way up? And stuff of this sort. You know, how pristine and sharp are my movements? Am I feeling it all in the right areas? And as you re-rack it, you kind of reflect in between sets. You're not chatting to people or looking at the TV or your phone. You're reflecting on like, okay, I need to do 8 reps on the next set. You know, how are the first 3 to 4 reps going to look? How are they going to feel? Now, on my last set, on the 5th rep, I kind of had a little bit of a micro movement in my elbow. Like, what am I going to do this time to prevent that from happening? You know, how am I going to position my elbows, my forearms, my wrists? How am I going to get that deep mind muscle connection? This internal dialogue is critical to optimize your results in the gym. If you're in between sets and on your phone, first of all, your phone shouldn't even be in the gym. If it is, it's on airplane mode. That is so distracting. Never have your phone on in the gym. I use the timer on my phone in between sets, but it's always on airplane mode. If you do use your phone, trust me, you're wasting your time. And if you don't value your time, then okay, you know. But if you go into the gym, like for me, I always kind of, your mind, you got to take into consideration, it's encased in a skull. It like never sees the outside world. So whatever you kind of make it believe, it's going to believe, you know what I mean? So if you make it believe like you're there fighting for your life, you know what I mean? Like your life depends on it. If your next set, your life depended on it, think about it in real life. Like, would you be on your phone? Like if you're like in a trench, you know what I mean? In World War I or in Ukraine today, and your commander was like, you're going to go over the line in like 1 minute, get ready, you know what I mean? Would you be on your phone, like texting and stuff of that sort? Rob, what is going on, man? Long time no see. We're kind of closing out on the live here, but I got maybe like 5 or 10 more minutes. But would you be on your phone, or would you be strategizing like, hey, I'm going to run over here. I'm going to hide behind this tree. You know what I mean? I'm going to shoot a few rounds in this direction, et cetera, to stay alive. So that's where your mindset needs to be. And that's a big, big factor. And a lot of people are never going to master it at that level unless they get like a really good coach in their corner, and it's a priority for them. You know, building an aesthetically appealing physique is a priority for them. But you guys see the gym goers, you know, they're there, you know, for like an hour or two, the whole time you're there. And they look the same year after year after year, if not worse. And they don't look impressive to begin with, you know what I mean? So that shows that just making it into the gym and doing a clock in and clock out type of mindset is not enough. You have to do all of this stuff on top of like a bunch of other stuff. We didn't even cover any nutrition or various other things, okay? But that's what's required. And there's no like ifs or buts about it. It's just not very natural for the physique to look very muscular because it's not calorically efficient in the sense that it is very calorically demanding. And because the human body hasn't really changed in 250,000 years, your body tries to be very calorically efficient. And if you have a lot of muscle, like for me, for example, I need to eat, you know, like 3,500 calories a day just to maintain my weight, and about 4,000 calories a day or more just to gain weight. So that's not very calorically efficient. You know what I mean? And since your mind thinks you're some caveman that still lives in a cave eating berries occasionally, it's not thinking like, hey, I have 4,000 calories accessible to me every single day, 7 days a week. So it's going to try to get rid of muscle in order to be able to conserve calories more. So you need to implement countermeasures to prevent this from happening. And some of the things we touched on, these are the big picture stuff. There's more things to consider, but this is like pretty much 90% of the puzzle of what we covered from a training perspective, okay? So again, focus, no distractions. Some little things you can do are kind of like wear a baseball cap like very low so you don't make eye contact with anyone. So you don't talk to anyone at the gym. So you don't check out the TV. and be mindful and conscious of like how many times your mind drifts from the workout during a training session. The more times it drifts, the less productive your training session will be. Again, like I always kind of tricked myself into believing like I'm there, like fighting for my life. You know what I mean? And that way your central nervous system responds accordingly, and you can put out the appropriate amount of focus and intensity. So Rob mentioned literally just now thinking about finding an accountability workout nutrition partner locally to help keep me on track. Yeah. Training partners are great. My only advice, guys, because of how schedules work, is to find a training partner that meets with you once a week, but typically not more than that. And kind of agree to meet that one day at that time, all the time, no matter what. Because once you start switching the schedule, the training partner kind of falls apart, okay? Just from personal experience. And ideally, try to find someone that's better than you. You know what I mean? Or it's going to end up being like a 5-year-old schoolgirl meet and greet where you guys just chit chat and gossip the entire time. So, okay. Yeah, and some other things to consider, guys. If you're not kind of like a little antsy and nervous before your next workout, you know, as you're getting into your next workout, especially on leg day, then your intensity is not anywhere close to things that would stimulate muscle growth on a consistent basis. Okay? So if you're kind of just going in there like uneventful already, believing like you're not going to make any progress and stuff of this sort, then your workout is going to reflect that, you know? So you need to master then sports psychology to get your mind to change its mind through neuroplasticity over time. And it requires persistent effort, daily effort to do this, okay? Because again, you're living in a culture that's very mentally and physically ill, with 9 out of 10 Americans being metabolically sick and 70% being on some kind of medical drugs. So you're not living in a culture like a Spartan warrior culture, that would make this kind of journey much easier. You're living in a very mentally destroyed, beat down type of obesity being normalized type of culture, so you're going to have a lot of negative influences. They're going to try to gravitate you back to a life of normalized pathology. And you need strong psychology, which you can find through mastering a lot of topics in sports psychology that can help you with that, okay? And the last thing, guys, that I want to cover before I got to take off here is what Rob mentioned. This is key. Consistency. That's the king of all progress. Consistency, showing up, whether it's a good day, a bad day, there's like a nuclear holocaust outside, it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? If you're hitting legs on Tuesday, you're going to be there on Tuesday. And just understanding that the mind is always changing its mind. That's its nature, you know what I mean? And that's never going to stop. So today, you don't like your job. Tomorrow, you do like it. The third day, you're like indifferent. And this happens sometimes even within a single day. You like your job for half the day and then don't like it for the second half of the day. You know what I mean? That's its nature. And if you're overly identified with the contents of the mind, don't be surprised then if you're very inconsistent. Because, again, the mind is always changing. So if it's always changing, it's unreliable, That's just how it is. So, guys, there's, of course, more topics to this. But these are the big players, to consider when you're trying to develop an aesthetically appealing body. And there's a lot that goes into it. That's why, how many times have you seen an aesthetically appealing body when walking around in the general population? Almost none. In fact, I read some article, I don't know if it was a bogus article, I forgot the exact numbers, but it said that there are less people with an aesthetically appealing body and six-pack abs than millionaires now in America. You know what I mean? So the answers are there. You know how to build an amazing body has been figured out a long time ago. But it's all about following these principles consistently and honestly. And then also just calling yourself out on when you're lying to yourself. You know what I mean? When you're like, oh, I am consistent, but really you're not. You know what I mean? Because without being honest with yourself, no real honest change can ever occur. Right? That's the foundation of all change. It's first being honest with yourself, how you're causing your health problems, whether it be mental or physical, et cetera, and not being stuck in the victim game of hamster wheel, basically not going anywhere. So, okay. Well, have a good weekend, guys. Rob, it was good to see you. David as well. Haven't seen you guys in a while. Or I've seen David, but haven't seen Rob in forever. Okay. Hope this was helpful, okay? Take care, guys. Have a good weekend.